Daniel Carter lay perfectly still, his eyes closed, the steady beep of the hospital monitors filling the room. On the outside, he was just another unconscious patient recovering from a terrible accident. But inside his mind, Daniel was wide awake, listening, waiting, and holding his breath for what came next. It all started with the screech of tires and the shattering of glass. The accident had been sudden, brutal, and completely unexpected. Daniel was a man who controlled every detail of his life, and yet in a split second, control had been ripped away. When he was pulled from the wreck, everyone assumed he was out cold. Daniel decided to keep it that way. Now, lying in the quiet of the hospital room, he heard footsteps approaching. Nurses murmured softly, and then the door closed again. He recognized the next set of footsteps instantly. It was Victoria, his wife. He could picture her perfectly, poised, elegant, always in control. But as she began to speak, the words that slipped from her lips were nothing like the loving wife he thought he knew. "Well, it's about time," Victoria whispered coldly, not knowing her husband could hear every single word. "If he never wakes up, everything he owns will finally be mine. And then we can be free." Daniel's heart stopped. He could barely keep his breathing even. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage was a lie. And he was hearing it all while lying helpless and still. He wanted to shout, to open his eyes, to confront her. But instead he stayed silent, his mind racing. The truth was out, and now Daniel knew he had to plan his next move carefully. As dawn broke outside the hospital window, Daniel remained in his silent performance, his mind a whirl of questions and emotions. He replayed Victoria's words over and over, each repetition sharpening the knife of betrayal. He knew he had to gather more information before he acted, so he remained still, listening for any other visitors. A doctor came in mid-morning, checking Daniel's vitals and making notes. "He's stable. We'll just have to see if he wakes up," the doctor said to a nurse who nodded and left the room. No one had a clue that Daniel was absorbing every detail. By afternoon, another visitor arrived. It was Daniel's business partner, a man named Charles, who had been his friend for years. Daniel listened as Charles and Victoria spoke in hushed tones. "Are you sure he's not going to wake up soon?" Charles asked, his voice edged with nervousness. "We can't move forward until we're absolutely certain." Victoria's reply was chilling. "He won't, and even if he does, it'll be too late. We'll have everything we need in place by then." Daniel felt a cold anger rising in his chest. Charles, his trusted partner, was part of the betrayal. It wasn't just about money, it was about friendship and trust, all twisted into a knot of deceit. He knew he had to stay calm. There would be a time to act, but for now he had to keep playing the part. He let his breathing remain steady, his body unmoving as he plotted his next steps. Night fell slowly over the hospital in Lagos. The city outside was still alive, cars honking, distant sirens, and the low hum of generators, but inside Daniel Carter's private hospital room, everything felt cold and quiet. The lights were dimmed. The machines beside his bed blinked softly. Daniel lay still, just as he had for days, but inside his mind was racing. He had not slept. He could not sleep. Every sound felt louder now. Every footstep made his heart pound. He was no longer just pretending to be unconscious to survive. He was pretending to uncover the full truth. The door opened gently. Daniel recognized the sound of heels before the voice followed. Victoria was back. She sighed as she sat beside the bed. Daniel felt the mattress dip slightly under her weight. For a moment there was silence. He almost hoped she would cry. Almost hoped she would say she was sorry. Instead, she laughed softly. "Do you know how long I waited for this?" Victoria said quietly. "Years, Daniel. Years of smiling. Years of pretending." Daniel's fingers twitched under the sheet, but he forced himself to stay still. Victoria leaned closer. Her voice dropped, sharp and bitter. "You thought you were so smart. The great Daniel Carter. The man everyone fears. But you never once asked yourself why I stayed." Daniel felt a deep pain spread through his chest. Not from the accident, but from her words. "I didn't marry you for love," she continued. "I married your future, your money, your name." She paused, then added something that made Daniel's blood run cold. And now, thanks to this accident, everything is finally falling into place. Footsteps sounded again. Another person entered the room. Is he still like this? A male voice asked. Daniel knew that voice. It was Michael, his personal lawyer. His trusted lawyer. Yes, Victoria replied calmly. The doctors say there's no change. Michael exhaled. Good, then we need to move fast. Daniel's heart began to pound so loudly he feared it would give him away. His will is still the problem, Michael said. If he wakes up, he won't, Victoria interrupted firmly, and if he does, he won't remember anything useful. Daniel felt ice run through his veins. What do you mean? Michael asked. Victoria hesitated, then said something Daniel never expected. The doctor is already paid. Daniel's mind exploded with fear and anger. Paid? Paid to do what? Michael lowered his voice. Are you sure this is safe? Victoria laughed again, colder than before. Relax. In a few days, Daniel Carter will either be declared brain dead or transferred somewhere he'll never speak again. Daniel screamed inside his head. This was no longer just betrayal. This was a plan to erase him, to steal his life, to kill him slowly while smiling at his bedside. Victoria stood up. Make sure the papers are ready, she said. Once he's gone, the company, the houses in Ikoyi and Abuja, the offshore accounts, everything becomes mine. Michael nodded. I'll handle it. They walked toward the door. Just before leaving, Victoria turned back and looked at Daniel's still body. Her eyes were empty. Goodbye, Daniel, she whispered. You were useful. While you lasted. The door closed. Silence returned. But this time it was different. Daniel's chest rose sharply as he took a deeper breath than before. His eyes moved. Just slightly. And in that moment, he made a decision. He would not die quietly. He would not stay silent forever. But as he tried to move his hand, pain shot through his body, and the room suddenly began to spin. Daniel realized something terrifying. He was running out of time, and someone was already coming back into the room. Daniel woke up to voices. Not loud voices, careful ones, the kind people use when they think they are safe. He could not open his eyes yet. His body felt heavy, like it was filled with sand. Pain moved through him in slow waves, but his mind was clear. Clear enough to understand one important thing. They were going to end him. A nurse adjusted the drip beside his bed. Vitals are stable, she said quietly. A man replied, Good. The family wants an update. Family. The word burned. Victoria arrived not long after. Daniel felt her presence before he heard her voice. She always carried herself like she owned every room she entered. How is he? She asked. No change, the nurse said, still unconscious. Victoria sighed. Thank you, I'll stay a bit. The nurse left. Silence filled the room. Daniel listened closely. Do you think Daniel should wake up now? Or keep pretending? Victoria picked up her phone. Yes, she said softly. Everything is moving as planned. Daniel's heart raced. No, he hasn't moved. Not even a finger, she continued. The doctor confirmed it again this morning. She paused, listening. I know, she said. We'll handle the transfer tonight. That's the safest option. Transfer. Daniel knew what that meant. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere hidden. Somewhere he might never come back from. Victoria walked closer to the bed. Daniel could feel her breath near his face. You should have stayed dead at the scene, she whispered. This is harder now. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to scream. Instead, he stayed still. Victoria stepped back and made another call. Yes, Michael, she said. Everything is ready. The documents are signed. Once the transfer happens, the board will follow my lead. She smiled. Daniel could hear it in her voice. The company will be mine by morning. Daniel's anger burned hot, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was it. He had to act, but carefully. Later that afternoon, Daniel felt a small hand touch his arm. A different touch. Gentle. Mr. Carter, a quiet voice whispered. It was a young nurse. Daniel had seen her before. She always moved slower than the others. Kinder. I know they say you can't hear me, she said softly, but I just wanted to tell you, your eyes moved earlier. Daniel focused. He moved his finger, just a little. The nurse gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're awake." Daniel opened his eyes halfway, her face filled with shock and fear. "Please," Daniel whispered, his voice weak but clear. "Don't tell anyone." She froze. "They're trying to kill me," he said, every word hurting. "My wife, my lawyer." The nurse's eyes filled with tears. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I knew it." "Help me," Daniel whispered. "Just for tonight." She nodded quickly. Okay, I'll help." Daniel closed his eyes again as footsteps sounded outside. Victoria returned. The nurse stepped back, acting calm. "No change?" Victoria asked. "No change," the nurse replied smoothly. Victoria nodded. "Good." She turned to leave. As the door closed, the nurse leaned close again. "They're moving you tonight," she whispered. "I heard them talking." Daniel swallowed hard. "We need proof," he said. "Something that can't be denied." "I'll try," the nurse said, "but we have to be careful." Night came fast. The hospital grew quiet. Then the door opened again. Daniel heard voices, low, serious. "It's time," a man said. Daniel's heart pounded. Hands touched his bed. They began to move him. And as the wheels started rolling down the hallway, Daniel realized something terrifying. Victoria was walking beside him, smiling, and she believed this was the last time she would ever see him alive. The hospital hallway lights passed slowly above Daniel Carter as his bed rolled forward. Each light felt like a ticking clock. His heart beat fast, but his face stayed calm. To everyone watching, he was still an unconscious billionaire being moved quietly through the hospital. To Daniel, this was the most dangerous moment of his life. Victoria walked beside the bed, her heels clicking softly on the floor. Her face was calm. Too calm. She held her phone in one hand, typing short messages, her lips curved in a small smile. "Everything is fine," she said to the man pushing the bed. "The ambulance is waiting outside." Daniel heard every word. They were not taking him for tests. They were taking him away. The elevator doors opened. The bed was pushed inside. The doors closed with a soft thud, trapping them all together. Daniel knew this was his last chance. The young nurse who had helped him earlier stood near the back of the elevator. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her eyes were focused. Daniel caught her gaze for just a second. She gave a tiny nod. That was all he needed. As the elevator began to move, Daniel slowly lifted his hand. Victoria didn't notice at first. Then the heart monitor changed. The steady beep grew faster. "What's that?" the man pushing the bed asked. The nurse stepped forward. "His heart rate just changed," she said loudly. "That's not normal." Victoria frowned. "Ignore it," she snapped. "He's been like this for days." Daniel took a deep breath. Then he opened his eyes. Wide, clear, alive. "Ignore." "What?" Daniel said weakly but clearly. The elevator stopped suddenly. Everyone froze. Victoria's phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. "Daniel," she whispered, her face turning pale. Daniel turned his head slowly to look at her. His voice was soft but firm. "Hello, Victoria," he said. "You look surprised." The nurse stepped back quickly and pressed the emergency button. "What is this?" Victoria shouted. "He's confused. He's not thinking straight." Daniel let out a short laugh. "I heard everything," he said. "Every plan. Every lie." The elevator doors opened. Security guards stood outside. So did the hospital director, and behind them, police officers. Victoria's eyes widened. "What is this?" she demanded. Daniel raised his hand slightly. "This," he said, "is the truth catching up." The nurse spoke up, her voice shaking but strong. "I recorded everything," she said. "The calls, the conversations, the plan to move him and harm him." Victoria stepped back, shaking her head. "You can't prove anything." Daniel looked at her calmly. "You proved it yourself," he said, "when you thought I couldn't hear." The police moved forward. "Victoria Carter," one officer said, "you are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud." Victoria screamed. She tried to run, but it was too late. As they led her away, she turned back to Daniel, tears streaming down her face. "I stood by you," she cried. "I deserved everything." Daniel's eyes were steady. "You stood by my bed," he said, "not by my heart." Days later, the story spread across Nigeria. News stations talked about the billionaire who pretended to be unconscious and exposed a deadly betrayal. The company board removed Victoria and Michael. Daniel took control again, but he was no longer the same man. He rewarded the nurse who saved his life. He changed his will, he changed his circle. And most of all, he learned a hard truth. Sometimes silence shows you who people really are. Daniel stood by his hospital window one morning, watching the sun rise over Lagos. He was alive, and this time, wide awake. What would you do if you were Daniel? Forgive Victoria or make sure she faces the full law? Tell us in the comments.